Right, let's catch up with James Heale, political correspondent at The Spectator. Hi, James. How was your Christmas, my darling?
Oh, it was good, thank you, Alex. Thank you for asking. How was yours?
Yeah, quite quiet, really. Quite sort of, laid back. Went to my boyfriend's brother's house for a nice little polite Christmas dinner. Very polite family he's got. My family are drunk by about 11 a.m. and being weird. But I didn't spend it with them. So we're going to have a second Christmas from tomorrow, which is when I'm going to be drunk and weird. Then yesterday was my birthday and I stayed in bed till 5 p.m. It was amazing. I recommend it. If people are thinking, what do I want for my birthday this year? I'm going to say that choose the gift of nothing. Don't look at your phone.
Well, I hope you had a good 21st, Alex.
Well done. You can come back on the show. Right, now let's talk about this big spat between Kemi and Nigel. If you were going to be referee, who's won?
I think it's too soon to tell. I think we've got some extra time left to play. Look, I'd say that both have scored a few points, but I think on this one, if it was a points decision, I'd award the bout probably to Nigel on this one, because it seems as though he seems to, by even debating this idea of growing membership, he's won, because it's the terrain he's chosen to fight his territory on. And so I think it's been a very happy Christmas for him.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, this is what Phil was saying. It doesn't even matter if that ticker was directly rooted into the growing membership numbers. The fact is everyone's talking about the growing membership numbers. So it just seems to me a rather strange approach. I think it's a strange approach as well that Kemi Badenoch keeps playing the game of, well, I'm not really going to tell you what I'm going to stand for. It's too soon to do that. And I kind of think, well, what are you going to do for the next 4 years then? Nothing?
It's a really good question about the pace of politics, and I think that the criticism sometimes you could label it for reform, maybe that they react too much, and perhaps one like Kemi Badenoch would be that she's being a bit slow, and I've heard that from Conservative MPs. I think the key thing is obviously you've got to know when to intervene and when not to. I think you have to be reactive, but obviously the last Conservative few governments made a lot of mistakes by jumping in and making decisions very rashly. She's saying she's going to try and take her time, but I do think you're right, Alex, in that we're not in 1975 anymore. You know, there's often people who like to draw comparisons between her and Mrs. Thatcher. Well, Mrs. Thatcher didn't have a party on the right to contend with the serious force, and so I think that in the new year, a lot of members of the shadow cabinet, a lot of members of parliament and the Conservative benches are saying, look, like, you know, we've had first couple of months or so, really we need to start seeing where the direction's going to be, even if we're not expecting you to lay out a full 100-page manifesto at the current time.
Right, and you know what? I think it's one of those sort of synthetic media nonsenses that when a politician says something then changes their mind. Oh, you turn, you said back in 1990. I don't think voters care. If a politician said, if Kemi Badenoch turned around right now and said, I think that we should be doing X, Y and Z, and then come the next general election said, well, do you know what? Things have changed. My attitudes have changed. The times have changed. That wouldn't any longer be a sensible policy. I'm sorry. The media might go, oh, wow, U-turn. But actually, voters don't care. They kind of like honesty and integrity. And I just get the impression that it might be quite honest. Kemi Badenoch saying, we're not going to tell you what's in the manifesto yet. But I think it's a bit of a cop-out because in that respect, she's not telling us anything.
Yeah, I think that you can also certainly set the direction and saying that, you know, we're going to be more willing to adopt pro-growth measures on certain aspects, which we weren't able to do in the last government for whatever measure, while also not saying, you know, here's going to be a whole full guide to our planning policy, etc. I think that in terms of U-turns, it's a really interesting question. I think voters, you're right. If they do something that they recognise was an indefensible policy, most voters are willing to not hold that against you. The key thing, I think, comes is when you do something that is directly against your brand. So for Keir Starmer, I think it was something that's done really badly, was him saying he wasn't going to raise taxes. And of course, they get into office and then straight away they do the national insurance contributions, which I think is sort of a bit of a weasel way of getting around their pledges there. So I think there are U-turns you can live with and U-turns you can't. The challenge is, of course, is to, you know, be able to live with the U-turns you make and also adopt some policy because you need something to campaign on.
Now, let's talk about Sir Keir Starmer eyeing up 5 priorities in Brexit reset talk. This is in the Express, good old Brexit Express, the Brexpress as we should probably call it. There's a number of these. Let's go through them, shall we, as a team. There's a number of these that I'm like, OK, quite sort of, you know, meh about. I'm not one of these because, you know, obviously I'm an ardent Brexiteer, but I'm not one of these Brexiteers who's like, oh, well, you know, it's absolutely got to be a Puritan. You can't have anything with the EU. That's madness. They're still next door to us. So some things I'm like, yeah, probably worth working with them on. But there are some that I say absolutely not. I'm going to go in reverse order here because the first one is one that I think is quite a good idea. Roaming charges that were reintroduced for UK residents in the EU in 2021 could potentially be scrapped in a deal with the EU. I mean, that to me just makes sense. We should have a deal where if people from the EU come here, they don't have to pay roaming charges and us there because we're right next door to each other. Of course, when it comes to the EU, they always want something in return. Let's talk about these two, because I'm sure I don't even need to ask you guys about the roaming charge. I think you're both going to go, yeah, wouldn't that be a good idea? Am I right?
Yep.
Yeah?
Yeah.
OK. Right. So let's talk about these schemes. So you've got the IRIS-2 space programme and the Galileo satellite scheme, both sort of big things that people don't expect the EU to be doing, but they do. Two big old projects, which the IRIS-2 one is supposed to rival Elon Musk's Starlink system, creating European sovereignty and secure connectivity, and then the Galileo satellite scheme, which was basically completed, or sort of in the process of being completed, as we left. And we stopped collaborating with EU scientists on that in 2021. Again, I kind of think this was the EU cutting off their nose to spite their face, really, because we're world leaders in things like, right, Phil?
Yeah, very much so. Galileo was a lot of British backing, a lot of British innovation has gone into it. You're rivaling GPS and would get around the military use of US GPS satellites and other bits and pieces and give Europe supposedly a degree of independence. It was never going to be able to deliver the sorts of levels that the US can. And then with IRIS-2, Elon Musk has done that as a private enterprise. He's done that through his private company. This should not be a government or a super government project put together. Why doesn't a big European company just go, we're going to fund something similar, and then it gets political backing from across the board? But
James, do you think it'd be a good idea, given that these things do exist and we actually did contribute quite heavily to them, that we got back involved with them?
I think this is one where, frankly, it's not of most concern to voters. I think people will adopt a pragmatic approach. My concern would be that you contrast the speed at which Europe's been operating in this field with America. Maybe it would make more sense for us to go our own way. I'm willing to defer to an expert opinion on that, but it would strike me that, given, as you say, Britain has a great reputation in this field, perhaps there's an argument to be said for nimbleness and actually kind of going out on our own, given the difficulties the Europeans have agreeing to cooperation in a number of different areas, including space and defence policy.
Yeah, we could be a world leader rather than just sort of giving the EU a load of good ideas and then saying, oh, can we join it again? This thing here, the EU Creative Europe programme, I've never even heard of it. Sounds like nonsense. But the Scottish Government have called on the UK to rejoin it. So the scheme between 2014 and 2018 awarded the UK £74.2 million to creative institutions. Like what? I mean, to me, this sounds a little bit like an EU propaganda arm. Oh, here you go, Channel 4. Would you like some money from Brussels? Please be nice about us. I don't. I just think this stuff is a load of nonsense, frankly. And I wouldn't be for us rejoining it. Your thoughts, James?
Well, I mean, I think, as you say, Alex, there's always a question, isn't there, about what are the sort of intentions going on here? And, frankly, if the money's just going to Brussels and some of it's coming back, it sort of seems like the kind of argument where it should be resolved in Westminster rather than in Brussels.
And finally, this one is the most portentous one. This is the one that they really want, right? Everything that, anything that Sir Keir Starmer goes to Brussels about, can we have this? Can we have that? Can we have, fewer trade frictions and so on and so forth? They're going to say, yes, but you've got to have youth mobility scheme. The thing that I think is going on here and why the EU is so insistent on this ain't about students. Right? If students want to come and study in the UK, as many do from around the world, they get a student visa. We know that because it adds about, gazillion people onto our immigration figures every year because they get to bring their nan, their dog and their babysitter. So it can't be about that. Also, if you want to go and work in the City of London or in a skilled job, you get a work visa. So it can't be about that either. This whole idea of youth mobility where you don't need to be studying something or you don't necessarily need to work, you can just come, I think, personally, is about the continental European countries wanting to offload their migrants because a lot of the people who've come into the country brand new from other parts of the world, putting strain on their economies, are under 30 years old. And I think this is basically the migrant quota scheme by another name. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's worth comparing youth unemployment, and obviously Europe, particularly Mediterranean Europe, has a much higher rate of that compared to the UK. And historically, when we were in the EU, and I'm not saying things haven't changed in the past decade or so, but the UK youth was always much less willing to take up this scheme. It was very much more a European scheme rather than one that young Brits made the most of. And so I just think that young Brits seem less inclined than their continental equivalents to try and go overseas in the rest of Europe. So yeah, I think there's a reason why the EU's pushing for it, and it's not about values, it's about interests. It's in their interest to do so.
Yeah, I can bet you right now, if this goes ahead and we take it, isn't it lovely, young people getting to go around Europe? Isn't that charming? Isn't that good? It'll just be a load of people from Germany who arrived there about 2 days ago, and it won't look good.